one of those last minute kind of requests. Mediation in a changing society. Because I told you the person who had given the topic, she's got her exam, so she could not have come in. And Nina was the other one who had put her name down, but I think she felt that she'd already discussed the topic or something like that. So not an issue. We, at least I said, let's put something out because for me, it's a very interesting topic. But
Mhm.
like always happens, we have to start from here. So, Lisa, what is the conference all about? What does it mean to you? Please.
The conference itself. So the conference itself, is that continuation of evolution of a mediator. That's what, but this conference is just about what are those topics? I mean, how are we having this revolution of mediation, dispute resolution, revolution? Those are your words, but they have a kind of a ring to it. So, what are those topics and what is relevant to that? And this got kicked off with Ken Cloke's birthday in 18th of May and continued till the end of June. So I really highly recommend people just listen and pay attention to the schedule. I know you have a link for the schedule, and I'm sure you're going to find a topic that's of interest to you.
Perfect. Because now we have what? I think 85 plus sessions which are going to happen. But in terms of what has already happened, is there something that you felt is going right, something not so right, or anything like that?
No, I mean, I think everything is the whole really beautiful thing about the collection of people is that there's a different perspective every time. And so you can get some little gem, no matter what the topic is. So I think it depends on what people are interested in. And if you don't have time, the really nice thing is those videos are going to be on Vikram's YouTube page, so you can see them in replay at any time later on. So I think that's the awesome thing.
Yeah, and I keep telling people, please subscribe to the channel because you get if you click the bell icon, you can get notifications whenever I go live on the channel or some new videos uploaded. And whenever I actually schedule a video, you get a message there also. The idea being that let's move away from relying totally on social media, otherwise LinkedIn or Facebook to tell you what's happening. This way you get a direct kind of an information. So I just felt that people should subscribe. I see a lot of people don't. A lot of people watch the channel but they don't subscribe. I don't know the reason for that. I really don't know. I'm sure they have their reason.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't subscribe to any YouTube channels. I know I used to be that way. I
Mhm.
used to just watch but not subscribe. So I think it's just a learning process.
Perfect. So Lisa, mediation in a changing society. Please kick off the discussion.
So I mean, I don't know what the woman who suggested it had in mind, but if we're looking at changing society, even the fact that now India is contemplating, how to add mediation. This is a change, and Singapore has their convention. That's another change, which you can speak more to than I can. But that's an example of change. I think the fact that mediation is exploding throughout the whole world now. Now we see so many countries with mediation and using mediation, so it's gaining popularity. That's another change. But I think some of the pressures right now on societies are part of that change. I think for me, I'm looking at climate change and the issues and problems that climate change are bringing. It means that we have to find more ways to work together if we're going to survive as a species. I mean, if human beings are going to survive at all, we have to find ways to come together to solve this problem and not start, arguing about it, but find ways to strengthen each other. So so in my mind, this is a more important role right now for mediation to help us through that those issues in life. But besides that, we've got political issues arising all over the country. We've always had that, but there's always new political issues. And the question is, do we want to take this to a court and have, a judge decide it? Or do we want to sit together and work together and figure out a solution that more people can be happy with? What is the preference? And in that case, mediation is important.
Before I start, I just got a message from someone who's part of the conference, who's just sent me a message that that session of ours, is it recorded? Is it available somewhere? No one knows about the YouTube channel, which goes out in every post. You know that it goes out in every post. So this is what the issue is. I think I write very long posts. I think I have to cut them down to some basic points only. So I'll tell you what the things that you came up with. Look, the Singapore convention part of it, why I need, because you said Singapore has a convention. Actually, Singapore doesn't have the convention. It's called the Singapore Convention because it was opened for signature in Singapore, like all conventions are. So, like you had the New York Convention for
Right.
arbitration because it was opened in Singapore.
Right.
A lot of people, I think, have started connecting it to Singapore, which has no connection except just the fact where it was opened for signature. And I think, in a way, Singapore also capitalized on it, trying to show it being their convention.
No, but I mean, everyone does that. In Dayton, we had the Dayton Peace Accords, which was Bosnia, about Bosnia and Herzegovina and that area. And because it happened, because they met at the Air Force Base in Dayton, Dayton is like, oh, we are the city of peace now. So that's only natural. When something big happens in your city, you like to capitalize it. Why not?
Yeah. So I tell you, in terms of the discussion on the mediation in a changing society, just before this, we had a session with Richard on family-owned businesses, disputes in family-owned businesses and mediation. So I was telling him that what has really happened in family businesses or otherwise in society is that you had these people in families who were available, the elder people, largely they were the elders, and you had them available on a online basis, on a real time basis, or whatever you might call it. And these people have now, I think, either lost respect. I don't know what's happened. Is that the changing society? What has happened there? Or whatever the reason there is. But I'm just saying that in terms of professional mediators coming in, that is the space that we are filling in to a great extent.
I think you brought it up in an earlier conversation because you talked about, of course, India now has become very individualistic. So if you went back, like say, when I first came to India in the 1970s and in the middle of a joint family, my father-in-law would have been the person who would have decided all of these things, especially when there was a conflict about like the farm or other aspects that the family were running. That would be family businesses, and everything would come to him and he would decide. The thing is that in an individualistic society, that's a little bit less desirable because then somebody is imposing their will on you, and that becomes more of a conflict rather than a resolution. So I think that's another change we have to think about, is if we're moving towards that, how do we do that in a way where we're working together more effectively? And we're moving away from this hierarchical structure, even in the family, to a more equal structure in the family. And so it's about finding those ways to have better communication and to be able to do that in a way where you're not fighting about it. Because a lot of times it's about, there's the fighting about the interest. It's a resource, right? A family business is the resources. And people start fighting about the resources. Well, I want a bigger cut of this, or I want that, or I want to do this and not that. And those kinds of things come up in a family business. So how do you create that structure so that it is something that people can get what their needs are met, and it is a benefit for the whole family?
I think the basics.
Think of that. That's what we're looking at.
I think that basic sensitization of people in the hierarchy at every level, that society is changing, things are changing. First of all, you can't dictate terms to people. Maybe that's changed. Maybe that's changed. I don't know. We think it's changed. Maybe we are part of that world where that's changed. So maybe that you have to bring people in into the conversation at every level. And this
Mhm.
is, I mean, this is something which I feel is not, one is of course within families, but in general, I think people want to be part of conversations rather than being told what to do. But again, back to the last discussion with Richard, he says, of course, people want to be told what to do. That's why they're going in for litigation, because someone, they want someone to just tell them. And that is what we've also discussed earlier, that aspect maybe is not changing so much. So in that sense, I'm looking at mediation. If you have to develop it, do you need to change that mindset also? Or I don't know what they're doing it for. Is it because no one wants to take their own decisions? They want to blame someone else for the decisions? Whatever the reasons, which are standard reasons, which I don't think have changed over time.
I don't know. I mean, what I discover is that when people know how to do it, when they know how to have the conversation, they prefer the conversation. Usually people prefer litigation because they don't want to fool with the conversation and because they think they'll get an advantage in litigation. So if I think I go to litigation and I win, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I kind of get a little revenge too. So and so if I think I'm going to win, I'm going to go to litigation. But what if you're not sure you're going to win? And what if, you can't be sure because you don't also get a say so. I mean, when we take something from the court, the judge will decide how much you say and what you get to say. So you don't get your say so. A lot of people go to litigation and then they're so unhappy. Like, I didn't get to say anything and they just decided. And they're unhappy afterwards. They're not happy with it. And then they continue in the conflict because it didn't get resolved. Their emotional needs didn't get resolved. But having the conversation itself is difficult. It's very difficult. And it's scary because I think the difficult thing about the conversation is that you have to open up a part of yourself that you're not willing to open up. You have to let that be there on the table. And if you don't want to do that, then you'd rather go to litigation because it's easier.
So that means in a changing society where actually people don't know, we don't want to, I don't know, either they don't want to take decisions themselves. I don't know that part, but let me, before
I
I go
don't
there.
think it's people will say it's the decision making, but it's not the decision making that people are trying to go to the court for. It is more that the conflict is so uncomfortable at this point. By that point, it's so uncomfortable that they know that having the conversation itself is difficult, and people are avoiding that. So
Mhm.
better to let somebody else decide because then it's done with and I'm out of there. And I don't have to have that hard conversation because a conversation is difficult. It's not easy. It's not like mediation is just some easy thing. It's hard. And I think recognizing that it's hard. The difference is, though, that you really get more of a say so in a mediation and you're more likely to have your emotions are more likely to be satisfied with the result. So that's the difference.
No, because this is exactly, I'd like to tell you just one session before. This is what Richard was also talking about,
Mm-hmm.
that people don't want all that concept of getting into a discussion or conversation. They just do not, I
They
don't think
don't
they
want
even,
to.
yeah, they don't, maybe whatever the reasons are. I mean, I don't know what the reasons are. We'll have to, that, I think that's something important to get into, because either are we moving away from the mediation when we would have thought people would move towards it, or if they
I
don't
mean,
want to.
no, I will tell you the case management, when you're doing case management, which means, that's getting the parties to the table to have the discussion. And the things that we've learned in case management are that if you can listen to them in that, just calling them up and listening to them in that conversation, they're more likely to want to come to the table. If you just say, okay, here's a mediation, come, and you don't really listen to all of the issues, then they're more likely to say, forget it, I don't want it. So it's a matter of, it is a matter of that listening and that skill of listening, and how much can you listen just to get them to the table.
That's an important thing.
And that's very important.
No, you picked a very important thing, but this is exactly what I've been talking about. The revolution is, on one end, you have the mediators, of course, identifying those with the mediator mindset. But the other end, you've heard me saying this, is the peacemakers who actually reach out. Now, I don't know. Look, I am saying mediators can also do that. I'm not saying that they can't, but maybe that's their skill lies somewhere else. Maybe we need to use that for that. And we have these peacemakers to reach out, because that's a very, very important link in the entire process, to be able
It's
to.
a very important link. I mean, that's what I learned, because I wrote the program. I had a victim offender mediation. Well, victims didn't want to come because, they were victims. They don't want to go talk to somebody who did something to them. But when I listened to them and I listened to all of the things they said, they were like, well, I guess I can come to the table, because all of a sudden they felt good about being heard. And I observed that difference. I went from 10% saying yes to 90% saying yes. That's a huge difference.
But let me tell you one thing which I should have, of course, when you that individualistic society thing came up, because when I said that, when you got offended when I said no Indian culture, when I was talking to Bernie Mayer, I told him, look, and when I use the thing that America being an individualistic society, I said, now I'm not going to say that, because on the reverse, when I told Lisa that the aspect of no Indian culture, I should not generalize on the American society also, because he said, look, we are a very diverse society, in a very nice way. He said it in a very nice way. Of course, I can understand where he was coming from. You can't generalize on a society. So now both ways I'm not going to generalize.
Well, I mean, what we say is you do generalize. Generalization is okay, but stereotyping is not. To say all people, if you say, and again, I think it's the bell curve, because on the bell curve, if most people fall in this bell, but you have lots of people who don't fall in that bell, and the bell can be very wide and not very high. So you'll have to figure out that when you're talking about generalization, you're talking about where the bell curve is higher. But
Yes,
it doesn't mean that the whole society is like that. And that's something that, like I keep trying to explain to people. It's not that it is that. It tends more towards this, then this one tends more towards that. And then on the scale, you can be really close together, but you're different.
no,
But
no, we should
then
not.
it gets
Yeah.
so complex.
No, no, we
But
shouldn't.
then
We
how do we
shouldn't do it.
talk about it?
No, no, we won't do it. We won't generalize there, because the thing is, because that way you leave out a lot of people by generalizing. So, oh,
You
this is that
do.
society, or this is what they do. No, we won't do that. I won't do that. That was, look, it just it suits my argument when I do that. That's the only thing.
Ah, but I mean, like I said, you can say in general, there is a tendency here for this. That's about how you should say it.
Okay, so I think, look, I tell you, in terms of changing society, you've heard me saying this, so for you it's a repetition, but the fact that, okay, the individualistic society aspect will happen in every society. Society is happening in every society everywhere.
It's happening all
Yeah,
worldwide. I
so
mean, there's
let's,
a lot of research shows that worldwide societies are moving towards individualism.
yeah, so basically in that kind of situation, definitely, like I said, that these people who were available to families, first of all, let's look at families, they were available there. Obviously those people are now either not available, or the way you have maybe structured yourself, you don't want to we make them part of it. I'm not saying listen to them. Look, for a moment I'm saying, okay, you might not want to listen to someone. First of all, the person has to be available for a person. If not, they're not part of that structure that you've created. So that's one thing. And same thing with communities. So families and communities, I think that's the issue that I think we moved away from. And how do we change that? Look, we also want to not just look at the issues, we're going to say, how do we change that aspect? Because bringing in a third person is largely, or is going to happen because of that reason. That's where the need comes in. So how do we, first of all, be able to link it to that part, and not link it to suddenly this is a new concept we're bringing in and we're throwing in a professional into the picture. I don't know
Well,
what you.
maybe the mediators themselves, this is what I think, is that sometimes ways that we help people can be different. That society may put pressure on us to use different techniques, depending on what are the needs of the people we're working with. So that may be something that's open for discussion as we move along. Like, if you were if you traditionally took mediation to an older member of the family from a high hierarchy, for instance, and that doesn't work because the society, moves towards a lower hierarchy and more equalness. So that person who is good at helping resolve disputes in that arena of high hierarchy might need to shift their way of discussing to a little bit more egalitarian.
Yeah. That's it. This sensitization I told you about. For you also heard that session of James Mangareri in Kenya, what he's doing. This is what he's doing. He's gone to these traditional setup, that structure of the village head or the tribe head,
Right.
and he's sensitizing them on this aspect that I don't know. Look, I am thinking that he's doing it in this way, but which is the way I would do it, is to tell them that look.
You think everybody thinks like you. It
No,
doesn't work.
exactly. No, but the idea being that explain to them, look, the thing is, society is changing. People are not going to listen to you. So if you want to stay relevant, you should change yourself and bring them into the conversation, and don't push what you want done. You are not going to decide for them. Don't force them into something. So that sensitization, not just in Africa, in India and other, there'll be lots of places where this aspect, because look, they also want to stay relevant, and they are not going to be relevant, they're not going to be listened to, and then that other structure that is created because of whatever, be it colonization or otherwise, then people go to that structure because
Right.
they just push there. So I think if they want to stay relevant, I think they might as well be able to understand this part of the changing society aspect of it. So I think that sensitization will help a lot, because we have these people available. The important thing is the trust. They have the trust of the people, but because of the way people are looking at how they are going to live their life, that aspect is the one that's getting affected, which can be changed, I think. And I think when we'll have a lot of these people available to us as mediators on the ground, which I think can be helpful.
I also believe, and I think arbitration is an example of what I'm going to say. So I believe that some aspects of our field, they start and they have good intentions, but after they've been used for a while, then people learn how to take advantage of them in a negative way. And that we also need to be constantly thinking about our field and watching out for that. Because anytime you use any model, that's one of the problems with traditional models, is they became stagnant and they didn't move, they didn't change with the society. So as mediators, we have to constantly be upgrading what society is doing and upgrading how we practice so we don't become stagnant, and also so that we don't become something that now can be utilized for what we're intending, not for what we're intending, but can be utilized to get a decision in somebody's favor, can be utilized for negative means.
Well, I think this is where you have to come in, because the changes that you have seen, and because of it, if things are developing in other parts of the world where your experience and I don't know what changes that have happened. Of course, you would be able to tell us better. But if someone can pick up from that and lessons from that, then why make the same mistakes again? So what do you think? What are the issues that you think have come up?
I think that that if you are controlling the process too much, you don't open up that can lead to stagnation. If you are, there are so many things that can go on. There's a red flag, when you start seeing people in favor of a process who will benefit from it. And so if you have a group that'll benefit every time in mediation and they're proposing mediation, then there's a red flag, because it should not, mediation should not favor one group over another. So we need to look for those red flags and then try to make sure that, in the process, that there's not that kind of thing going on.
No, actually, I don't know. Of course, this part is a different part, but I'm just
I know
trying to
I'm
get.
speaking very
No, no,
generalistic, so
no, no. I will make you speak a little more specific on this. It's an important part that you're talking about. But let me bring in all this aspect, that one is the aspect of the involvement of the mediator in the process, where the models of tying the hands of the mediator sometimes, I think that part of it, from maybe another, it's a cultural thing. I don't want to say cultural thing because I'm saying that's too generalized a concept, but I'm just saying maybe the way mediation developed in some parts where it was, where the hands were tied to a great extent, maybe that needs to be opened out. And the way mediation has to go out, if it hasn't developed so much, is it because of that? Is it that people are looking at a lot more involvement of the mediator, which definitely is not going to be okay, I'm forcing you to do this, definitely not, and not pushing your solution so much, but somewhere people maybe want that, and maybe people have not realized that, and people have then, obviously, the other option they had was arbitration or litigation, where they needed that much more, and they were not given that. In some parts of the world, I'm not saying everywhere where it's happened that way, but some parts of the world, maybe that was something which came up in the middle. You think?
Mm, um, very possible, because sometimes if there's a lack of trust because of things going on in a society, that's going to affect, what is allowed or what is people feel comfortable with in a mediation. And that would lead towards that society putting greater boundaries in mediation in order not to allow, some nefarious purpose. So that can happen. It's a matter of then dealing with, okay, where is that? And is that the best solution for dealing with mediation? Or is there another way where you can make sure that trust is part of that?
Yeah, with
We get this in we get this in almost every field. It's not, it's not something new. I know, like in arbitration, what happened is businesses started seeing that, wait a minute, if we require arbitration, then we can push the arbitrator and we can have them, favor us. So businesses then knew that arbitration is good for them. And of course, I think everyone has to realize that it's important. If I'm a business, I want things to be in my favor. It's about the money in my business. So that's natural. So we can't say the businesses are bad for wanting that, but we have to look at how do we protect that process for the people who don't have power, who have very little power. How do we do that so that they have a voice in the matter, and not blame the business because they want to have an advantage? That's natural. So, so it's looking at it in a more balanced way. And then if at any point mediation starts to get to be so the people in power can have an advantage, well, that's natural for them to want it. But then what do we have to do to assure that everyone's voice has an equal opportunity?
So then, where Bernie Mayor's neutrality comes in, that part of it, that the role of the mediator is different from what maybe was what people had pushed it out to be, and that word itself, which we of course
Well, I
discussed, was
mean, yeah, go ahead. So Bernie's dealing with more of a problem-solving model, a transformative model. We were taught in the very beginning, well, it's not, neutrality is not something you can reach. However, if you are practicing in a way where you let the parties decide, then you are letting go of having to be neutral, because now they're controlling the process and what's being said. And I have nothing to do with any decision making. Therefore, it doesn't matter what I think. What I think is not part of what I do. And as soon as you take that away, you don't need to worry about neutrality in that sense. Neutrality comes in when I am going to decide who speaks first. Well, I may not be neutral on that. I might like that guy better. When I'm going to decide, or when I'm going to ask questions, I'm going to ask questions to lead people into a direction of resolving the dispute. Well, I might have bias about what I think has to happen. And if I have bias and I'm asking questions and leading people towards my bias, that's also not neutral. So, those issues come up. And so I think that's one of the reasons I like transformative. Me personally, I'm not saying everybody will, and I don't diss other models because I think that, they have they have a lot of beauty in them, but that's one of the reasons I like it, because I don't have to decide. The parties will decide what they want, and they come out really nicely.
Okay,
They're
so
pretty good at knowing what they want to do.
So the question for Baruch Bush will be transformative mediation in a changing society. Something there. We'll get him to.
Baruch Bush will have lots to talk about, I'm sure.
That's why I told you I made that session from 1 hour to 1.5 hours, because at least that's the minimum we would need.
Yeah.
No, but let's look at a changing society perspective. Let's look at one, people are fed up with litigation, which they should have been for many, many years. But let's say they've become more fed up with mediation, with litigation. So in that kind of, I'm going back. Look, I'll tell you, I'm still going back to this evaluative aspect of it. That you at one end went for litigation because of a certain aspect that you wanted someone to do something for you, tell you what to do or whatever. You didn't want to take a decision, but that failed. That whole structure failed. That institution failed. So this is one option, which is another method. So in this kind of a changing thing, when people are moving away from litigation, in that sense, this evaluative part fits in more towards that. It's not, of course, they're going to make the decision themselves, but more towards leaning more towards that side. Is that what people would want? Is that something where, that's why again I'm going back to the involvement of the media to that extent. I want to actually understand that part, and to see that maybe the way that facilitative mediation was pushed around the world, and that's the way a lot of countries picked it up. Was it that maybe mediation did not take off so much because of that?
No, I don't think that's the case. I think that the facilitative model is, first of all, it's a lot easier to practice. The transformative model is not easy. So, I believe that the facilitative model is easier. It's easier to feel trustworthy. I mean, like if you're adopting mediation for the first time, it's easier to go with the facilitative model. So I don't think that it is a limitation at all, and that it has, it's had that place. I feel like as facilitative models become more experienced, I see them becoming a little bit more transformative, and I see transformative mediators being a little bit more, as they practice, learning a few of the skills that are good from facilitative mediation. So it seems to me like that there's some value in both, that at the end of the day we both learn from. And I don't mean that transformative mediators become directive. They don't, but you do learn some techniques that are used.
Okay, so now let's look at society in general. Of course, we out of the models now. We leave the models behind. Let's look at the larger thing: changes in society. What are the changes in society that have taken place, say, in the last how many hundreds of years that you've been around? What have been the changes that you have seen now? And
there's so many hundred, like years that I've been around.
You picked it up a little late, but
yes, in my many, many years. I mean, we definitely, I think one of the things we haven't talked about really, and if we're really going to talk about a changing world, we have to talk about technology. We have to talk about, the communication has changed from a deep conversation to a tweet here or there. And how do you, and this is where a lot of our conflicts nowadays are arising, are in misunderstanding and miscommunication that comes from an Instagram post or a tweet post. Or we see this in youth when we work with youth. It's, well, he put something up in Instagram and it was so insulting, and the kids are fighting and they're getting into a, physical fight and hating each other over what? Over something they saw on Instagram. So really we have to talk about that, and how is that communication changing, and how's that going to be for youth? They're so used to this quick, 1 minute bite. We see news now. News is no longer what it used to be, which was more balanced. News in general, at least in the US, has become part of media, has become part of okay, I own this conglomerate and this is the viewpoint we want to put out in our news show. So instead of being that, all encompassing, here this side believes that side believes that, now it's sound bites that are good for people who will pay to listen to it. So we, the society, are promoting that because we listen to it, and we're not stopping it, but we don't think that we are the ones. We blame them.
True. True.
Okay, oh yeah, blame them. Well, it's not their fault if you listen to it. It's not their fault if you were picking it up. But that's where our conflicts are. So many conflicts now are on Twitter. So many conflicts are because of Instagram. So many conflicts because of Facebook. And we live in bubbles. If we talk about bubbles, I mean, it's like if I live now where all the information I get is everybody who agrees with me. I mean, that's why I like you. You don't agree with me. So it's so nice that I have somebody that doesn't agree with me. But nowadays, in the younger generation, they don't like it when people don't agree. They're used to everyone believing what they believe. And they're in this little bubble of people who believe only that. And when they start to get confronted with something different, they're like, what? How can that be? And then they start fighting. And then we have this other part of society in all of the TV shows. And I know it doesn't matter whether you're in Bollywood or Hollywood, you know, the popular movies are bang, bang, shoot 'em up. Everything is resolved because you shot the other guy and you killed him. And like we have that mindset as well, that there is a belief, very strong belief, that if you don't agree with somebody, the best way is to just get rid of them, wipe them off the face of the earth. I hear young people say this all the time. That's a changing society. That is changing the way that we look at society. I mean, how would you introduce a hero like the Indonesian Krishna, with hands down, and how he conquers the demons is not to directly bang bang shoot them up, but to be calm and to be welcoming. We don't even think about that as heroism. We think of that as weakness. If we define that as weakness, then how are we going to get to that society where we're able to have that kind of shift?
What we do is let's break it up first into the
Sorry,
aspect
I
of.
went off.
No. This is perfect. We'll get to that. But the first thing that you said was that the communication that is happening is things like a tweet. It is not. I mean, people don't have enough time for a whole conversation. They want their communication to happen in short bursts. And where does that? I mean, where does mediation fit into that? And of course, using technology for mediation, definitely that part of it. Like what Colin Rule in that last symposium was saying, that everything people are doing in apps. Why not divorce through apps also? And so I
Why
think
not, actually?
no, they're working on it. They're working. There is that. I think there are some apps now. So the
Well, I
whole.
mean, I think that's helpful when people are. So I've had people come to me for divorce mediation, and I sat down with them, and because I sit down, I'll go and sit down with them, and like, okay, and both of them said, "Oh, but we agree on everything," and I said, "You don't need me. Just go fill out the paperwork and go do it." Why pay me?
Exactly.
I can't.
So maybe in that sense also how they want it delivered to them. That aspect, of course, that is a whole area of practice and discussion, which obviously he had touched upon those things, and I'm sure things have changed since then because it's almost a year since that happened. So we should, of course, discuss that part maybe with him or someone else who
Mhm.
brings in that part, because technology definitely must be playing a major role, which we also don't know about what's happening at the back. And then how are we
No,
you?
they do. They have these great apps too. I have to say that, as long as you brought up Colin Rowland apps, that like for divorce, if you have a divorce, instead of having to communicate with one another, you can use a wonderful app where you put all the information about the child in the app, and that way both parents get all of the communication, and they don't have to fight with one another. And what happens when they use that app is they tend to communicate nicer later on. They're not fighting. So it's like I believe apps have a wonderful positive influence that we should be using.
And also, I think the way you are communicating, because of obviously with a lot of short videos coming in and a lot of course, I mean, there would be graphics and other things. Maybe, maybe the whole concept of how
Yeah.
communication has to happen also. Maybe people don't want to sit down in a certain space and then talk about things. Maybe they just want something thrown at them through a short video or something like that. We don't know how they want their mediation done.
I don't think that happens, but I do think, I mean, I think that we are impatient, like news stories changed from deep, New York Times, or something, to what's popular is that I forgot the name of this publication that is like, you can figure out all the news in 2 paragraphs or 2 sentences. Oh yeah, that's all you read is the first 2 sentences. Nowadays people don't read long news stories that go through all the different aspects. They just want the headlines. Headline news is that's it.
Yeah, because look,
um
but if you scare people to say, look, you'll have to come in and book a half day kind of thing, a lot of people talk about that way. The people would just, they don't want it. How can you do this in 10 minutes? I have 10 minutes to do this. So maybe the whole concept of how it is packaged, maybe that also needs to change. It is not, maybe there was a whole traditional way of packaging it for, because there was a reason maybe at that time. Today, people don't want it that way. So how do you promote it in a manner where it doesn't come out as a process which is going to go through all this and all that? Maybe you have to change that format also. I don't know how, what all you think, what changes
I
can
don't
be
know.
done.
I tell people, if you come prepared and you're ready to talk and you can do it in 10 minutes, I'm all for 10 minutes.
Yeah. So look, I've been telling everyone, because for me that is the way I practice, that whatever you want a short meeting, it's just a okay, that's to discuss and that's it. That you don't have to now take out time for those few hours to get into a conversation. That's where the whole online world comes in. Get
That's what
in.
I that's what I say, but I can tell you, when they come in, they spend a lot more than 10
Yeah, yeah.
minutes.
No,
I've
whatever is
never had
required.
anybody I've never had anybody really be able to do it. Maybe 1 or 2 people who came in so prepared, but most people, once they get to the table, they want to talk about everything.
You think the attention span has gone down? So those longer meetings are not what people want in any case. You think that attention span has gone
I
down
mean,
over
I
time?
think that yeah, I think that especially when you're uncomfortable, when you're having a hard conversation, you don't want to think that you're going to be there for hours. So I mean, that's why again, I like to say you can decide how much time. We can break it into more than one meeting. We can do it whatever's your comfort level. So I like the parties to decide that, because otherwise, I don't want to say, oh, you're going to be stuck here for 3 or 4 hours.
Okay. Okay. This part
And
is,
like,
of course,
if you tell me I only want to be here for an hour, at the end of 1 hour, I'm going to give you the option whether you're finished or you want to come back.
So, okay. So the other thing now is, Lisa, we have to touch the social changes that are happening or have happened. But look, there will be some issue or the other which will always keep on going on. There will every society will have something or the other. So I'm not saying that in general there will be I mean we have more conflicts, because of course I don't talk about conflicts. Of course I'm on the dispute part of it. But in general, in society, all those issues that are taking place, has there been some change in the understanding of those things? Is there a different way people are perceiving them? Have things got better, got worse? And where does mediation fit into that?
Um, I don't, I think in general, people want to have this feeling that they're getting along. Even if they made a decision, say, to get a divorce, they want to be able to do it without having the conflict. I think just the way that people communicate is different. I could see a whole mediation by text.
No, no, here
It
I'm
could
going
be,
to, yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
absolutely.
that it because a lot of people will text rather than talk. Even within the same family, I can be when I go visit my son, between the upstairs and the downstairs, they text each other all the time.
Yeah,
All conversations are happening throughout the house by text. So that's a different way of communicating. Um, and
yeah.
it can be inclusive. I think that, okay, so let me go back, because I always hear people, especially older people like my age. I'm not a typical person my age, but I hear people, this texting, it's terrible. And then when I was growing up, when we're talking about way back then, when I had changes, I remember when I was little, there were telephones with party lines, and you didn't know who was on the other line. And then there was the telephone, and my parents would always say, "Oh, this telephone, it's ruining society. All this telephone technology, all they want to do is be on the phone." And now we're saying that with kids. And I think that that's just the evolution of communication. And that what happens with a communication is that in the beginning, you don't know how to regulate it in terms of your emotions and other things. So you had to learn, on the telephone, you're far away. Maybe I can say something and you'll be upset, but it won't be so bad. But then, you start learning how to communicate on it better. And the same thing is going to happen with all the texting and all of these other things. People are going to learn how to use it so that it's more beneficial and like we initially back in the 90s, when I was one of the first and early people to adopt this texting communication, because they had something called the well. I don't know, maybe you haven't heard that. And then we also had some texting communication, and you would see people put out things that might be insulting because they thought they could get away with it because you don't know who they are. And that's what I see still going on today. And then as you get practice with it, you start to learn how not to put out that communication, or how to, because it's like we have a natural filter that we wouldn't say face to face to somebody what we would say on the internet. And that filter will start to change over time. People will start to get filtered in online communication eventually.
Now we have to go beyond that. Now the larger social problem, is there a changing society in relation to that? Or maybe the issues have changed. Do you think the issues have changed, or those also remain the same? What?
The issues are always the same. I mean, with young people, it's always, he said, she said, or I had a crush on this girl and
No, look,
that
look,
guy. And
Lisa, I'm trying
who
to
did
get
he
you
say? That
out of all.
doesn't change.
I'm getting you out into the social problems in the world,
Okay.
and there have things changed, or the way society perceives those have changed, and are they looking at solutions differently? That part, or the larger
I
social
mean,
problem.
there are good and there are bad changes. I mean, and definitely we see in marital relationships, they're becoming more equal. People are getting married for different reasons. Um, in groups also, we see these different changes in how do you form your group, who is part of your group. Now groups have taken the place of what used to be families. Used to be only families were the group, and now they've increased to include friends and other things. So we see that change happening in society in general. So that who is your social club is different. And now we're actually seeing, because of the internet, we're seeing in our groups people that we maybe never met are our close friends. That's a huge revolution.
But what about, where does the mediation fit into that?
I think that mediation fits into that, because where the issues are going to arise when people, it becomes a problem when, like if you want to accomplish, maybe it doesn't matter. For some things, you can just cut the cord and be in a different place. So in that case, it doesn't matter, right? But mediation becomes important when we need to work together, we need to be together, and we need to find a way to do that so it's beyond our conflict.
No, but I'm now looking at all those race, color, caste, creed, those kind of issues. Has there been a change there which can now is, I think, do you think mediation fits in there more than it would have earlier, or less than what it would have earlier? Anything there?
I do think it can fit in a lot more. It's a lot more complex when we're talking about race and religion, because there are a lot of other hidden issues that don't come out in general in a mediation. So it takes a little bit more effort on the part of the mediator, or a little bit more awareness on the part of a mediator. I've been in a mediation where there's been definitely an issue of race. And my co-mediator, for instance, didn't pick up on the subtle signs. And if you don't put it on the table, it just gets erased. So, and then I have to ask myself, were there signs I didn't pick up on? Maybe because I have some internal bias. So it's like we have to make sure that we're allowing those to be on the table, because otherwise we're continuing that breakdown. I found with religious and ethnic conflicts, I think many different, I think the process is not just one mediation, but several different kinds of mediation when you're working with those groups, so that that's more effective. And I think I I want you to get this lady on. Okay, this one, this lady,
Which is the lady?
Severine Altacer. She wrote this book, Front Lines of Peace, and you might even agree with her. I don't know. She talks about how big problem with peacemakers, for instance, in the world, is that they always like outsiders, and they don't know anything about the local culture or the local customs, and they don't really ask questions about that. And that's what has to happen more, because you can create peace. And I think she'd be very interesting.
What's her name? Severine?
Severine Altacer. Well, of course, I don't know how to pronounce her name. That's how I think it's pronounced based on what I see.
What's the book called? What's the book?
Here it is.
Severine
Severine Altacer is called The Front Lines of Peace.
Oh, okay. Okay, ma'am. That's the promotion of book done.
Promotion of book. Yeah, maybe she'll give me a, I haven't met her. I'm really dying to meet her. But I like the way that she looks at it, and I think that she looks at it from bottom up is better. But you have to have both a top down. So it's not that you don't need the outsiders, but you need a top down and bottom up, and you can't ignore the bottom up. And so if we're talking about peace, I think the issues is particularly with religion. They're so complex. They're so ingrained in things that have happened for ages and years and years. And we don't understand how we are already biased, with our own upbringing that sometimes we can't see what those issues are.
No, but what I'm saying in terms of changes, are people more willing to talk about certain things which earlier they may not have been able to? So that's where mediation fits in, or have they closed themselves more where they're not willing to have conversations? What do you have? How are you? That's the change with
I
there. That's
can't
where
generalize it because both are true at the same time. It depends on where you are and who you are with. In some cases, it's more closed. In other cases, it's more open. Both are happening. Both are happening. Definitely in the U.S., you see both camps. You know, there's those camps that are open up to all kinds of new things they never thought would happen, and this is that, and they're shocked at how they think. And then there's a camp that's closed and like, let's shut it all down, not have that. And there's a threat. I mean, sometimes we find that being open to different concepts, and mediation asks us to open up. Mediation asks us to be open to the differences. It doesn't want to close it. So if you want to be closed, you're not going to be in favor of mediation, because mediation itself is asking you to open up to the possibility.
no, that's what I'm trying to
um,
understand. Yeah, because I'm saying that look, for people to be willing to have conversations, first of all, have they reached that stage when they can have conversations on certain issues? Or is that the fact that social media and other media, there is so much availability of information and disinformation that maybe maybe creating too much of a rift between people that conversations will become more difficult? I'm just thinking, I don't know how you're looking at
no,
that.
I don't know. I mean, in some places, again, that we see that where it has shut down, but on the other hand, we also see that um, what I have noticed is that the hype would make us think that we're more divided than we are. But the conversations show us that we are not as divided. So when you really go into a place and you start having the conversation, you find out that it's not that divided. But when you listen to the social, not social media, but media in general, it's like, oh my goodness, we're so divided. Um, and it's not that. I can go into a community just yesterday, no, Saturday. We went to the supermarket. There's a big supermarket called Costco here, and one lady was with a T-shirt that said Trump. So, and there was another gentleman who didn't agree with her politics, and he and she's were having a conversation, and they were listening to each other. And I kind of like hung out in the other aisle. I kind of, listened.
Yeah,
Yeah,
overhearing with the conversation,
overhearing the conversation
eavesdropping.
while I was looking at cereal.
There are
I
stalkers
was
and there are listeners.
I was eavesdropping because I was really curious about what was happening. And he was talking to her and he was saying, well, this thing happened, that thing happened. And she was saying, well, I just feel so frustrated. And, and I don't know where the conversation ended up. But the fact that they were talking to me was just a really beautiful thing. That two people from two different camps were having a conversation, and that they were, talking with one another. So that shows you that it's not as bad as you think, because they weren't angry. They were just sharing their perspective.
So I think that's the point, that the extreme views are the ones that you actually see everywhere, because those are the views that actually get more views, and then they get more views, and that's what goes around. So definitely there are reasonable voices, and which is what I've been saying, and you heard me enough, that look, there are people out there with the mediator mindset. They will bring in that sane, reasonable voice into communities. We just have to identify them, bring them forward, and the conversations around them will be reasonable conversations. And if looks,
Yeah,
it's not that everything has to end up in a solution. I mean, it's not about that. It's just the fact that you can have that conversation.
exactly. And when you can have that conversation, and when it is even without a resolution, when it's a respectful conversation, you're more likely to have these people getting along.
Exactly, exactly. That's the
Yeah,
thing. Like between us, that agree to disagree kind of situation, that's perfectly all right. I mean, the idea is not that you don't have to sell your model to me and I have to buy it. Is that you're able to talk about it and I can disagree, but still we can still have conversations. So I think that's where the important part
absolutely.
lies. So I think
Yeah.
that's the thing, that our people, it has that connection become worse or better. With, first of all, like you said, there are still a lot of communication channels available, lots of information going around there. Has that made it better or worse? That's one thing that we need to also look at. Because if it's become worse, because look, I don't read the news, I told you. So for me, that world that people are part of, and who said, one of those, one of my, where did I hear this? Look, the people who watch CNN and the ones who watch Fox News live on different planets. So for them, the
It's
reality,
true.
the different
It
realities are
is
there.
true. If you believe it, or well, it is a matter of, how much are you taking in for that. I used to watch news a lot, and now I don't watch it at all. Like, oh, I don't miss it.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That the point is that, are we changing enough? If you are not doing it, I'm not doing it. Is there, are there enough of us who are moving away from it? And then obviously we're not influenced by personal agendas, or a lot of people coming onto that side, or not. How do you look at it?
I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping that people will figure it out, and it
So,
does seem there is some evidence, and I don't know this for sure, but there is some evidence that people are moving away from cable news channels in general, because, and I only say that because there's some evidence that they've lost viewership.
so that, the sad
So
part that,
that would say
yeah.
that maybe there is a movement. I don't know.
No, Ajay, the sad part that I see is that when I see people who are mediators, and look, I'm not saying about the mediator mindset. Well, that's, for me, that's a different thing. But like, so there's the mediators, and I sometimes feel that they are themselves getting dragged into those situations where they are in some way, okay, they're affected by it. Maybe yes, they're affected by it, but then falling into that trap of, I'm not saying it's disinformation, information, because I also would not know the difference, because definitely these are factual things, and who knows what those facts are? Who's going to go out and check this out? So I'm not going to get into that. But I'm just saying that I think mediators still, if they start falling into that trap, then when are we going to have those sane voices and reasonable voices? If they've fallen into the trap of, I'll use disinformation. I'll use that. I'll see negative, all the negatives that are, well, passing around. So that part of it, how do we? I don't know. Can you even stop that from happening? I don't know whether you can, or the people with the mediator mindset will not fall into that trap. So then that is a test. Maybe that's the test of the mediator mindset.
I think we're human beings first, and human beings are the ones who fall into that trap. So if
We can't
you're
be.
going to, no, there is no one out there. As soon as you're a human being, you have limitations.
We
And
can't
and
have that.
that's just the
Yeah.
nature of being human. We don't have any perfect human beings. Even the gods who were born in human bodies had their fallacies because they were human beings.
No, but
So
I'm
as
telling you that.
long as you're in this body, you're stuck.
No, I'm telling you that people with the mediator mindset do not fall into that trap. I don't think they do. So I'm telling you, that's another aspect which I have to bring out. One, of course, after heart, soul, spirituality, and pushing it a lot. And now, this test of the mediator mindset, and where does it? I mean, I look. I'm not saying that happens to everyone, but I'm seeing some people falling into that trap, and I find that not the best for the mediation world to see that happening, because if they also fall into that trap, then where is the hope? Then I don't know. So I'm saying that let's keep that hope. It's just a few people who will understand, they'll get back, and that will not be the trend, because that kind of a changing society where there is so much of negative news or information roaming around, and
There's
some
that
people.
negative news. There's also, forces that want us to move in one direction or the other, influences. But it I mean, I don't know, how do you stay away from that, because it also goes back to some very deep-seated, maybe, when we were young, prejudices we might have that people hold on to. So I think it's important for mediators to examine themselves. And where are those biases deep down? If I had a bias against tall, beautiful women, and I know I'm short and stout,
We're not judging, okay? We're
I'll
not
like,
judging.
like, and I said, oh, there's this tall, beautiful woman, I'm gonna diss her, I'm gonna it starts to bring out my negative thing, because I don't like seeing this gorgeous woman, and I'm not gorgeous, so therefore, I'm not gonna do anything to help her out because she doesn't need help. Like, no, that's part of that's I mean, it's a simple example, right? But that is sometimes those are deep seated, maybe they're part of our own insecurities, maybe they're part of, our own thinking, but then we have to address them. We have to see them. We have to say, well, wait a minute, that's not fair. We have to get over them. And I know, like, I used to have, I still do, like, if there's a really tall man, eh, I feel like overwhelmed. And because I'm short, I'm only like 5 feet tall. And if I get some 6 foot, 7 guy, and then especially if I'm dealing with somebody, who's in reentry and like they're 6 foot 7, I could feel really intimidated. And I learned that, well, I can't let that overcome me. And I made an intentional commitment, that I will definitely talk to this person and start to feel comfortable. And I got in trouble because I have an elevator story about that.
Mhm.
There was this really, really tall man that got into an elevator, and he had, and I was was at a mediation um, meeting in the capital of Columbus, and I was going up to the like 10th or 11th floor, and this tall man gets on with his assistants, and he's talking, and I said, oh, you didn't even notice me, but I was making a joke about my shortness, and he said, I said hi, and I go, yeah, yeah. And he was saying, well, he was telling his assistant, let's just skip that meeting. I said, oh, so you're skipping meetings. And everyone in the elevator was like, oh my gosh, they looked horrified. They were like, why is she talking to him? And then he got off the elevator, and then one of the people in the elevator said, do you know who that was? I said, no. They said, that was the governor. Apparently, I made a mistake. I met him, I don't know, a couple of years later in another meeting. And I said, do you remember that? He said, I don't remember. I said, oh, I'm glad.
But okay, the good part is the online world, all that height and all has gone out. There is no concept of you're getting affected by height. So one aspect gone. Good.
I know, but I noticed it when I met a group of people I was training in person, and I realized I was the only short one. I said, I look so much taller online.
Exactly. So those are issues that have now been in some way handled. So now you can go, if that's an issue, now you can go totally online, no concept of it.
Yes.
So those options have been given to you.
Yeah.
So Lisa, that's I think I don't know if there's anything else you feel in terms of
No.
changing society, if there's anything specific that's coming up, or anything that you see. Of course we discussed the whole concept of refugees and mediation, but that's not a changing society. Refugees have been around, they've been there, and those, what has been common for them, I think kind of will remain the same.
Well, I mean, refugees do have an impact on the changes that happen in different countries, and we're impacted by the different waves of refugees.
but
So
but, but you watched the one yesterday, the one that we had yesterday, of course.
I didn't, I was busy doing something else. Actually, we were having a vacation day.
Very nice.
It
What is
was Juneteenth. Yay.
what is the Juneteenth? What is it?
Juneteenth. Okay, so here is the thing. So after the Emancipation Proclamation, which gave all of the slaves freedom, the slaves in Texas were not given that information, so they were still living in slavery. And so sometime in June, And people have decided it was the 19th, but it was some 10th in June. That's why it's called Juneteenth and not 19th. Somebody finally let the slaves in Texas know that they were free. And so the belief is that as long as some of the people were enslaved, everyone was enslaved. And so it wasn't until Juneteenth that all of the slaves finally reached their freedom. And so that's why, and now it's a national holiday, and it should have been a national holiday a long time ago, but now it has an official holiday status. So it's very special.
Nice. And I think interesting thing that which, of course, connected to the social change and all that. I think because of technology, and which is again I've been talking about how we can involve a larger number of people, and the people more affected by things like, say, climate change, that community sitting in one corner of South America somewhere, being able to participate in discussions. I think that can be a changing aspect, and where mediation can fit in quite well if it's used properly. Whether it's going to be used, are people going to let that happen or not? But at least you can give voice to a lot more people in mediation itself. So
Yes, and I think also, like I said, like the idea of the bottom up process, especially for people who are not. I mean, we find that in climate change, even in the minor things, it is the people who are poor, who are already undervalued in society, that are the ones that suffer the most from climate change. So if you this morning on the radio, I was listening to a radio show, and they did a survey asking people, have you been affected by climate change? And they went all over. And 90%, 80%, I think she said 80%. So 80 to 90 said that they had been affected one way or the other. Maybe they'd been in a tornado, or maybe they had, a drought or whatever, but they experienced it. And then what they found out is the ones that suffered the most financially and economically were the poor and underserved people. So really, we also have to think about climate justice. And that's where mediation can help, because those voices need to be able to have a voice in the process and what's happening.
yeah, because of the whole concept of dialogue, that whole concept can change today, because otherwise you had some people sitting in some place in some nice part of the world and having conversations about people who sitting in some corner of the world and who did not participate in it, did not have a voice in it. So I think that, but
Absolutely.
is society ready for that change? Is
Yeah.
the peace industry ready for that change? Are they willing to get everyone in?
I mean, we have to. It used to be, that I mean, it still is in a way, right? That the U.S. has been one of the biggest, taken advantage, and then we're out there saying, oh, we need climate change. You can't develop over there, because if you develop over there, we'll have more pollution. Well, that's not fair either. So we really have to find a way that everyone has a seat at the table, and
But
and and are able to move up. Yeah.
but is society ready for that?
They better be, because we have to survive.
No, I don't know. I don't know. Are people ready for that? That is something we have we changed enough to get the voice of everyone on the table?
Here's what I'm saying: get ready, everybody. Whether you're
Perfect.
ready or not, get ready.
Okay. Good point. A good part. Good place to actually end it
Okay.
here, only because but there is dinner pressure on me at this stage. There is. So,
Definitely.
Lisa, thank you very much for dropping in on a last minute kind of situation. And of course, let me tell if all the panelists again, please, you can join any of the conversations. Drop in. Let's have the conversations tomorrow. I don't know whether you're dropping in. You have some interesting things happening tomorrow.
I don't
Obviously, the
know. Well, look.
morning one you'll miss. That's the multi-party disputes and mediation with Sarah. Sarah Blake is always nice to have a conversation with her.
Ah, yes.
To drop in for terminology and mediation, all the various terminology. I don't know what all the person who suggested it, what they have in mind, but Sounds interesting to me. But let's see where it goes.
Yes, the language.
Yes, so that open for that. Who
Hey,
suggested that? Jeannie has suggested it. Yes, Jeannie has suggested. She's also like you. Okay, a lot of the discussions we have is because of certain old school kind of things that she also brings in. Then we have Singapore Convention in the digital era. Singapore
I
Convention
don't think
discussion.
I'm old school. I think I'm pretty modern for my age.
No, certain things we do have that. Again, we do have that agree to disagree kind of thing with her. So you'll get along well. I'm sure. I don't know whether you
That's
both
just
will
because
get.
you know my age, and so you look at me that way. That's not you stereotype me.
No, no. Talk to Jeannie. I'm telling you that when we have our conversations, a similar situation. So we've also reached that agree to disagree kind of thing. It seems to
Mm,
be. So anyway, you've been in touch with her. So I don't know.
okay.
Okay, so that'll be interesting terminology and mediation. So thank you, Lisa, and we'll see
Okay.
you soon.
Bye bye,
Bye.
everybody.